And we'll get started. So friends, we are so happy that you joined us tonight for the July Equip and Connect webinar. In January, we did a series of them, and then every month since then, we've held one or two on a variety of topics. You can always go back, and I'll put the website in the chat in just a minute, so you can always go back and see the ones that you missed because they are recorded, as this one will be. So if there's someone you want to share this with later on, you'll be able to do that because the recording will be available on the conference website. My name is Kim Ingram, and I'm the Director of Ministerial Services and the Conference Secretary, and I'm just the host for our conversation tonight. Let's start with prayer, and then I'll introduce our three guests. So let's pray together. For the ways you inspire us in ministry, God, we give you thanks. For opportunities to reach new people in new ways, we give you thanks. For leaders being willing to share their experiences, we give you thanks. Open our eyes and ears and minds to imagine what can be. Give us courage to try something new, and reveal to us partners so we don't do it alone. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen. So tonight's Equip and Connect webinar is called Reimagining Faith Communities. And we have three of our clergy leaders in Western North Carolina who are going to be a part of the conversation tonight. And they include Darryl Dayson, who is the pastor at South Tryon Community Mission, and it's in Charlotte. And Bridget Thornton, who is the pastor of Scott's Chapel United Methodist and Mosaic Emerging Community. And these are in Iredell County. And Jonathan Coppedge-Henley, who is the pastor of Woodlawn Community Fellowship Church, and that is in Charlotte. So we are excited to be here, and I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves a little bit and their ministry settings, tell you a little bit about the kinds of things they are doing. And then we're going to have a conversation with each other for a little bit, just doing a little bit of a deeper dive into the kinds of experiments they've been trying, some of the focus of their ministries. And then we're going to have a chance for you to participate in the conversation with some questions. You can keep the questions in the chat or you can put the questions in the chat while we're talking. But at the end, if you want to just come off mute and ask a question, you'll be welcome to do that. So I think we're going to start with Darryl. Thank you all for being here.
Hey friends, welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for the wonderful introduction, Reverend Ingram. But I'm Darryl Dayson, and I'm just blessed to be a part of this conversation here today. It's been really a broader blessing being a part of our connection. I've gotten the chance to serve several different contexts, whether it be a first church ministries that are geared toward people who are homeless and unhoused. I've served in small neighborhood churches. I've served in large congregations, in some small congregations. But the context I'm serving right now is South Tryon Community Mission United Methodist Church, right there in 2516 South Tryon Street in Charlotte, North Carolina, 28203. Just in case you were wondering, I give that specificity because one thing that I have noticed, regardless of the place that I've been serving in over these last decade or so, what's been the most important is trying to figure out what it looks like to embed myself within the congregation, but also the broader community. And to see where those connections are when I enter those contexts. What has helped me in these places to, I guess, see how people are, I guess, spiritually curious in these places is just making myself available in those spaces, walking the neighborhood, showing up in places that I shouldn't show up. One of my fondest memories, it was a Good Friday service when I was serving up in the Asheville area. Instead of being appointed a role in the service, I actually wandered to a local bar in my stole, in my cross, and I just sat down and started having conversations with people. And they just looked at me and like, isn't it like, aren't you supposed to be doing something? But in that time and place, and then also in other areas in which I've been able to just show up and to be and to make it known that I am a clergy person, that I'm walking alongside a spiritual community. Folks just automatically start to ask curious questions about the faith community that I'm a part of. They'll start to lift up anecdotes about their faithfulness or lack thereof, their love of the church, sometimes their disdain for the church, so on and so forth. But I've noticed that serving in all these contexts, folks often ask, well, 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 how do we connect with people in this way? We are really good at thinking about systems, methods, and process to get people to come into our worship services and to become members and whatnot. But we aren't as good at connecting or we have not been, I've seen, as good at connecting with our roots. And that's just that we are people who are there. We're present in all the places and spaces that people may find themselves. It could be, of course, it could be on Sunday morning worship, in Sunday school, in Bible study, at VBS, the potlucks that we have at church. But we've also found ourselves in many different places throughout the years as Methodists, in schools, in work yards, in prisons, in hospitals, sometimes at the bar or two, hush, hush, don't tell anybody. Um, but being in those places and spaces and people wondering why I was there, I would always have the opportunity to say, I'm here because you're here. Um, I want to get to know you. I want to know your story. I want to share in that story. And I also want to just hear about what God is doing in your life. Sometimes those conversations are tense, but often it starts to build and foster some trust in maybe even pathways for healing as people have gotten to share where they have been, where they are now, where they hope to go, and maybe see glimpses of how God has met them in the past, is meeting them now, and may meet them there in the future. But I'm so happy to be here and to be a part of this conversation. There's some more particularities about how I've done that in my ministry, walking in neighborhoods, community meals, so on and so forth. And I would love to share those things when we continue in our conversation. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Darryl. So next, Bridget is going to tell us a little bit about her ministry.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm Reverend Dr. Bridget Thornton. I am new to Western North Carolina, so thank you for welcoming in this past annual conference. I transferred from the Florida annual conference, where I had an opportunity to serve a lot of different contexts there. But we're happy to be here near family. And here I serve in Statesville in Iredell County, which is the county seat. I have two churches. I serve Scott's Chapel, which is a historical Black congregation, so a cross-racial appointment. And then I'm an emerging community pastor where we're called Mosaic. And at Mosaic, we center around the table. But let me back up. Here in Statesville, according to Mission Insight, which is data that is available to all United Methodists as they move into a new place, or whether you've been there forever, you can pull up census data and Pew Research data. And according to those numbers, 70% of the people in Statesville within a 5-mile radius of where I'm at have said that they don't regularly attend or participate in church. And at the same time, most of them also clicked that they were spiritually curious, spiritual but not religious folks. We have over 100 churches in Statesville. So to do an emerging community, we wanted to do something that the others aren't doing, because that is not the formula that's working. Sunday morning doesn't work for these 70 people, or 70% of the people. So we particularly reach out to people who've been hurt by the church, and we don't offer a Sunday morning worship, which is really hard to explain to people who are traditionally churched. They're like, well, where do we find you on Sundays? I'm like, well, you can worship at my other church, but Mosaic doesn't worship on Sunday mornings. We worship around tables, and that happens here at a church. We have inherited a closed church. So we have a dinner church on Thursday nights. We meet in the coffee shop. We meet in a bar. We meet on the playground. We'll meet you anywhere you are and want to form community around a table. And that looks different in each of those places, but they're all centered around making a safe space for spiritual curiosity. One of them is particularly interfaith, our coffee group. That group is interfaith, and so we set ground rules right from the start, and I now apply those ground rules to all my communities. And we always say, just always refer to Rule 6, which is don't be a jerk. So we invite spiritual curiosity. We don't try to convert one another, and we explicitly say there'll be no judgment. So if a person says something that we just don't understand, we can be curious but not judgmental. We live around those ground rules, and we live out our faith authentically in the community. And since I'm particularly working with church harm, authenticity has been quintessential to who we are. We have to be authentic people in all the spaces. And so as the pastor, I try to show up in all the spaces as the same person. So I don't necessarily speak differently on Sunday than I do in these groups. And I try to remember that even on Sunday morning when I'm at my, church that has the formal liturgy, that we need to use words that are not so churchy. And so when we begin to just speak in everyday English with folks about their spiritual curiosity, you'll be amazed at how much conversation can be had. And since we meet from everywhere from the bar to the playground, we also keep church safety at a core. So safe sanctuary training is required for all our volunteers, and we keep the children safe through all of those spaces, because a lot of the church harm that people have experienced happened when they were a kid first. And so we can say, yeah, there's a lot of mistakes the church has made, but here at Mosaic, we strive to keep kids safe. And this is the particulars of how we do it. So we host a summer literacy camp where I have 40 kids running around all the time, and we work with kids throughout the community in different ways. And so that's who I am and where I'm at, and I'm excited to be here with you all tonight.
That's great. Thank you, Bridget. And we'll learn a little bit about Jonathan and his ministry. Hi, Jonathan. But you have to unmute. There you go.
Yeah, there you go. Hey, everybody. To echo a little of what Darryl and Bridget both said, it's really kind of cool to be able to be a part of a conversation like this and to be able to just explore some different things that people do and the ways that we do them. And so my ministry, I guess I'm the old guy here. I've been doing this church thing since, way back as my good friend Dan Hester put it at annual conference, since the last century. And in the course of that time, I've served so many different kinds of churches that ultimately disaffiliated, churches where I was the first full-time pastor they ever had in rural Guilford County.
Simple. Give us a call to schedule your free gutter inspection if you decide to move forward with the project.
Hold on, I'm looking for it.
Wow, is that me? It could be me. I don't think it's me.
I got it. Go ahead. Sorry, I just had to find the
I did just clean my gutters, so that very well could have been. Anyway, so I've served a lot of different kinds of churches, and First United Methodist uptown Charlotte, to a plant, to co-pastoring with my wife Elizabeth Coppedge-Henley, and now at Woodlawn, which is Woodlawn here in Charlotte, which is the merger of a couple of churches. The former, many people may remember Mosaic United Methodist Church, which changed its name to Selwyn. And then they merged with Grace United Methodist Church, and we kind of sold one of the properties or entered a joint venture with that and combined so that we can redevelop the 5 acres where our church is now. And what's been really interesting about that is that it was two churches that had their own unique cultures, they had their own unique situations and ways of operating, and they came together because they believed that they could do something different, and they were committed to being a neighborhood church and doing something valuable for the neighborhood. They were committed to staying United Methodist, and they wanted to be with all the full inclusion that would hopefully imply, which is something that I think we're still working towards as a denomination. And then the third was this wild little phrase because they had opportunities to join plenty of other churches that were doing exactly what they were used to doing at their churches, but they decided they wanted to do church different. That was their phrase. We want to do church different, and somehow that's how I ended up being appointed there. And what we're going to be doing with this congregation is coming to we're doing a building project, and it's centered around neighborhood and the idea of neighboring and creating neighbors. And so the way that our church has grown the most is by we just simply created a free meal, a free dinner for every Thursday night. Just invited everybody in the neighborhood who wanted to come. And it turned out that there were a lot of folks who were all, God was already doing things without asking the church's permission, and which is kind of a cool thing about how God behaves a lot. So there was this whole group of people who were already doing the work of neighboring with each other. They were already eating their meals together. Their kids already ran into each other's homes without knocking on the door. And so this neighborhood that is right behind our church, that's really where a lot of the growth has been. And so our building project is centered around having a 7 day a week coffee shop that can be available. We've got, according to Mission Insight, we have 44,000 people who live within 1 mile of our church. That's a lot of human beings who make their home within walking distance of where we do church. And so to be able to create something that's available for the neighborhood, and a cafe being a regular part of that. And then the other thing that is really essential in realizing who those 44,000 people are, there is a massive income gap. And that population, so the huge income gap between two of the zip codes, and our church sits right at the junction between those two zip codes. In addition to realizing that income gap, we also know from some of the pastors who we've spoken to in the poorer or less high income neighborhood, what we've discovered is that population is probably a whole lot higher than is documented. So part of what we've done as a church is to take that food theme, and we give away fresh produce every week with an organization here in Charlotte that goes to local farms, helps support those farms, but then also we're able to give away fresh produce. And so today this morning, for example, we were able to give away fresh produce to around 250 people, which is a lot of bags of cucumbers and tomatoes. And if food is love, then this is something that we've started to embrace as a church. Is that there's a lot of stuff we can't do. We're a small church, basically a new church where we're learning how to get to know each other and how to be church together. But the one thing we know is that we can sure eat together, and that's something that is common to everybody. So we get to know a lot of the local grocery stores. I've just recently gotten to know Compare Foods over there off of South Boulevard, which if you have not gone to Compare Foods, if you've got one in your neighborhood, you need to go there, because it is not going to be the same folks who go to Harris Teeter. I promise you that. Anyway, and what we've found is that a lot of storytelling and a lot of listening. It's taken part of our recalibrating as a new church has been to just learn how to ask good questions. And I think the folks at the church have gotten really good at asking interested questions without prying into people's lives. They've gotten really good at asking the kind of questions that open things up for people to say more, to talk about themselves and the things that are really important. Because I think at the end of the day, one of the things that matters most to any of us is that we just want to be seen, and that takes some intentionality on a church to center voices that are often not heard, to center at least with our attention, even if it's one-on-one, and that's the appropriate place for it. And I think that's another, that could be a rabbit trail we could chase. What is an appropriate place for it? But to be able to center the person that you're talking to with your attention and to show up for that person, even if it's only for that little bit of time. So those are some of the things that are really important to how we look at what we do at Woodlawn, and those are some of the things that I think I've tried to learn over the years that have become really important, and I've had some weird experiences and done some weird things, but in all of that, it still comes back to the same thing. People long to be seen, and I long to be seen too. And our stories are the way that God's richness and God's presence emerges, is through the stories that we tell. So I can't wait to tell some stories a little bit later on.
Jonathan. So I'm going to bring all of us into the spotlight for some conversation, and then we'll open it up to everybody. Let's see, I think I can spotlight me too. Yeah, so here we go. So one thing I do want to point out, Jonathan mentioned it, but I think none of you talked about it beyond that. Just to point out that none of you are in big churches. They're all relatively small congregations, communities of faith. Bridget, I know yours is a whole collection of kind of smaller things, but it's not that it takes a large church and a lot of resources to try something new or to get into your community. To me, it takes some courage. So that's my first question. It's not on the sheet. So because I think that this kind of thing can be hard for introverts, and just kind of showing up and making yourself available and trying to start conversations and getting to know people. And I wonder if one of you has a thought about how you encourage it, especially, we have lay people and clergy on the call, but quite a few lay people. How do you encourage laity, especially maybe introverted or quieter ones, reserved people, to show up in these kind of spaces and have conversations? Bridget, you unmuted. Do you have a thought?
Well, my first thought is from the Gospel of Luke, the 10th chapter. Jesus didn't send folks out by themselves. He sent them out two by two. So it's not something you have to go by yourself and do, and maybe you partner with somebody who is more extroverted. The other thing I was going to say is, I'm an extrovert, and it's not always easy as an extrovert to go into the unknown space in a place where you're typically not welcomed or thought of as being welcomed, and just strike up conversations. So if we start, though, from a place of curiosity and a place of love, that helps us to find some courage, because we don't have to bring the gospel anywhere, right? God's already in the places that we're going to. God is already in the communities that we're at. We're going to catch up with God and see what God's already been doing around us. And so when you approach it from that vantage point, coupled with the vantage point of the Holy Spirit's already at work, so I don't have to convert anybody. I don't have to convince anybody. I can just show up and be like, hey, how's it going? What's happening in your life? And from there, a conversation can begin. So I would say you don't have to do it alone. And part of that is reframing our theology, that we're not bringing God. God's already there.
That's great. That's really helpful. And I kind of heard that in some of what all of you said about how you do approach your positioning yourself in the community in particular ways. So I wonder, Darryl, you have recently been to Boston, and you and I haven't had a chance to talk about this yet. But I'm curious, you went on an exploration trip. What are some of the things that you experienced or encountered or excited about kind of connecting more with now that you're back, or when you came back to Charlotte?
Yeah, so one of the things that the community I'm part of have been trying to figure out is what it looks like for us to deepen our connection with the broader community that we're a part of. So Brook Hill Village, and also Southside Apartments, both historically Black communities right here in Charlotte, in lower income housing and also Section 8 housing. We've been trying to just discern. So as we are building connection with these communities, what does it look like for us to listen deeply to them, and to hear about what their dreams are, what their hopes are, what their joys are, and also what their needs are. Being in a community in the south side of Charlotte where the area around is rapidly gentrifying, we don't take that as a bad thing. It just means that there's some economic mobility that is coming in the area, and it just takes us to be intentional to see what it looks like to harness that for the good of the communities that we're a part of. So um, we so I went out to Boston. My wife and I, who's also a United Methodist pastor serving at Pineville UMC, in because we heard about wonderful ministries and nonprofits that are there. One thing that we learned, Boston being such an old town, old city, that they've been able to find ways to support the communities that are there, in just deep and meaningful ways, finding ways to help out with economic mobility, finding ways to connect people to resources, finding ways to make community, when folks have been fragmented and separated. But what I'm excited about is that there are so many models for what it looks like, for us to build community with folks that that we already naturally desire to be around, that we don't have to recreate the wheel. And that's the that's the biggest thing that I've learned throughout my ministry. I went in bright-eyed and bushy-tailed thinking I needed to create the next new thing. But what I've learned is that I need to find what old thing has existed for long enough for me to learn about it. And then to tap into those things. And I've just been excited to hear about ways in which social enterprises, businesses that encourage um, businesses that encourage ways to uplift the communities that they are around, or to create sustainability environmentally, um, nonprofits that are able to connect people to the things that they need and the people that they need to be around, so on and so forth. But there are so many things that are out there that I just didn't know about, and it's invited me to continue to search for those things, to see what we can glean from, and to hear about beautiful stories about other people doing it there, and then having that be testimony for what I can encourage in my community, and also the communities I'm a part of.
And so it sounds like it's a combination of identifying some needs that people might have, and then the partners to work with you or ministries that already exist. And Jonathan, it sounds like that's what you've done with this feeding ministry. I'm curious how you talked about how you identified the need, but how did you identify the partner? How do you go about figuring out who you can partner with? As Darryl said, something already exists. You don't have to create the wheel. You just have to find where it already exists. How did you go about doing that, Jonathan?
Well, for us at Woodlawn, the connection, it's an organization called The Bulb. And the way I connected to them was during COVID, when I was at another church. We just started giving away meals at that church, and we started doing it every Saturday morning because the school system finally caught up with how to get meals to the school kids. And our after school that we had at that church did a similar thing. So what the congregation then found a way to do was to give meals away every Saturday. And one of the volunteers who was with me, it's a way long story as to how I knew this couple. I ended up doing their wedding with a computer set up on ladders and cell phones so that we could do a Zoom wedding in their backyard during COVID. It was kind of crazy. Anyway, but they apparently they knew about this organization, The Bulb, and I connected to them, and that was how we found out who they were. And I love what their mission is, which is to empower farmers, because food, there's food insecurity that we're very aware of and that we talk about a lot, but there's also a thing called food sovereignty, which is giving people a capacity to be able to have their own food and the capacity to determine where their food comes from. And so, farming is really important in that whole thing. And so, part of the Bulb's mission is centered around that. And that was how we found him. And here's the interesting thing about this. And hearing Darryl talk, I was thinking about part of what sent me off on one of the little life journeys that I set off on a few years ago was hearing Brian McLaren and Elaine Heath in conversation talking about one of the ancient monastic communities that what they would do is they would go to a new community and they would set up on the outside of town and then get to know the people in the town and figure out what they really needed. So if they needed a bakery, okay, cool. They would, find a way to set up a bakery. If they needed a brewery, okay, cool. They'd set up a brewery. If they needed farmed produce, they would set that up. Whatever it was, they would learn how to do those things. And in the context of that, our tradition is John Wesley, who a little torqued that he wasn't given a pulpit when he wanted one. And he said, so fine, if you won't give me a pulpit, I'll just resort to vile field preaching. And as a result, his vile field preaching ended up being what would transform. And it was centered on all the same types of things. Making sure that kids had food in their bellies, making sure that people were seen, making sure, and that was so much of what centered Wesley. And that's why, for me, that when I heard the two of them having that conversation all those years ago, it set me off on a journey because one of my favorite things to paraphrase is Howard Thurman, who said, stop asking me what the world needs and stop asking me what you should do with your life. Ask yourself what makes you come fully alive, because what the world needs more of is people who are fully alive. And so to your original question, Kim, I think, yeah, I'm an introvert. Every time I take the Myers-Briggs, I am an introvert. There's no way around it. And it just means I fake it really well, I guess, on Sundays. But there is this thing that, like, if you get me in the things that I'm real passionate about, storytelling, watching people experience joy for just a minute. I'm pretty sure that had to, get John Wesley lit up as well. Some of the same kind of things. I'm sure that's what lit Howard Thurman up, watching the light bulbs go off for people. And for that to happen, it really is important for people to be fed. And anyway, and so that's how I made the connection. And what I found since then is that the conversations that are had, there is something really natural if people are willing to just be people and not feel like we have to wrap words around everything or wrap theories and structures and systems. Something natural happens, and it happens across racial, economic, gender, all the different ways that we slice the diversity pie of this world. Something beautiful happens when people just stop for a minute and let the Holy Spirit work through them and just breathe and just be together. It doesn't fix all the social problems, and it doesn't fix the systems and structures, and that stuff is still there. And it doesn't fix the power dynamics that exist. But I'm constantly amazed on Mondays. We open up at 10:30, and what started happening is we've now got a crowd of people at 9:15 waiting for the food truck to come so they can help us set it out. And then the folks who are there to get food wait they wait their turn. It's like they all know who got there first. Something weird happens when people are just able to be people together.
That's really awesome.
Anyway, sorry.
I have a question for Bridget, and then I'm going to let y'all talk to each other. So, Bridget, following on what Jonathan said, it sounds like really the way you've developed this emerging community is that to connect with people in particular places and to kind of embrace and develop community in that way. And I know one of the places you said was a playground. I think one's a brewery. Talk a little bit about how you identified those third spaces? And then when you did, kind of what happened in them? And especially folks who are kind of listening to the conversation, what does it look like to start to identify the place and then start in it?
Yeah, so each place is a little different, and I don't know that I've hit the nail on the head with them because we are a experiment, literally as an emerging community. So we embrace it and we just throw things against the wall and see what sticks. With the coffee shop, there's one main coffee shop in town where everybody meets, and so we started there. And then some of the, especially Pride community said, we don't feel very safe in that space. That's not historically been a safe space for us. So we as a group now are sampling all the coffee shops that surround Statesville to try to find the right atmosphere plus the right coffee price, because that's expensive. Don't give me $10 cup of coffee that's this big. We're going to be mad. And my group feels the same way. So we're reevaluating that space. Sometimes you just try and it doesn't quite work. The bar, it is a brewing company, but it's more a bar that we meet in. Everybody in town said, well, you shouldn't be in a bar. You should be at the Wine Maestro, the wine shop in town, because that's where good Christians go. They don't go to the bar. And I said, good, I'm going to the bar. So it was really easy. If the Christians are going here, the Christians, I'm going to go to where the other folks are. And I picked that one because it was the one that didn't have something every single night of the week. All of our bars in town are very scheduled with their own attempts at forming their own community and getting sales and things like that. And so they had an opening on Wednesday nights, which has been fun because after 2 years of sitting in that same bar in the same time on the same night, you get to see all those regulars. They get to see and know you. And we had an in when we wanted to do beer and hymns in town and partner with some other churches, so that one of the other partner churches had gone in and asked, and they're like, no way, we can't do that. And then I called the owner, who I've become friends with, and I'm like, hey, Joe, can we do it? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, well, I'm with those other people. And he's like, oh, well, then I guess it's still okay. So some of it is going to where the good folks aren't. Go to the spaces where they're not already happening, and just be willing to try. I haven't hit the nail on the head with Playground Church. I haven't found the magic hour or time or space, but we keep trying. We keep showing up. We keep going to the playgrounds to try to hang out with other kids. And we might convert it to, how do we bring the playground to some neighborhoods that don't have playgrounds? So for example, we have a motel that's just less than half a mile, quarter mile from the church, and it's transitional housing. And those families have a hard time getting to a playground. So how do I bring what we've been doing on the playground to them is the new question. How can we set up some fun things for kids in a parking lot so that they can have that experience without having to go to this place that's in these nicer neighborhoods?
That's great. So you're always trying something new.
Yeah.
So I wonder, before we open it up to everybody else, do you all have questions or thoughts that you want to share with one another?
What, as of late, has sparked your spiritual curiosity in the neighborhoods that you're in?
I mean, that's a loaded question, Darryl. Kind of wish you would have answered it before you. You know.
Well, we don't have a
Um,
lot of time, so no, I'm kidding.
yeah. You know, language is a barrier. And I don't just mean between Spanish or Vietnamese and English. Sometimes even two English speakers, language becomes a barrier. I've been real interested lately in how people express themselves. And so one of the things that we do at Woodlawn is we've developed a pretty rich relationship with the arts community in Charlotte, and in particular the not so much the high end, sort of Blumenthal arts people, but but the more on the ground, the people who want to paint the murals on the side of a building, and the people who want to do yard art, and the people who do performance art and don't have a place to do it, and jazz musicians who need a place just to practice. I've gotten real interested spiritually in how, and I think the congregation has kind of demonstrated some of this back to me, and how people express themselves, and how God, the different ways that God shows up. Um, sure, the Jacob story, surely God is in this place, and I did not know it. Did I stall enough for you, Bridget? Yeah, okay.
Yes, thank you. I think for me, well, the easy answer for me is in our interfaith group, because each of us are always made richer when we share our diverse backgrounds, and our different understandings, and can come away not having to convince the other person, but learn from the other person. Um, but honestly, sometimes when you're with folks who are anti-church and they ask you the really hard questions, it really forces me to dive deep and go, you know what? I can see where they're coming from. Yeah, church people kind of suck a lot of the time. So why do I do this? And kind of re-dig into, oh, why do I do this? Because, I believe in Jesus, because he changed my life. So it forces me to keep coming back. That's a great question. It's like you ask questions of people for a living.
But don't think that lets you off the hook. So,
Well, I think what's got me curious in the neighborhood that I'm a part of, one question I often ask people when I first meet them. I'm a weird guy. I ask people a lot of questions when I first meet them, and I tell them right out, I'm gonna ask you a bunch of questions. After I ask them what their favorite Disney movie is, I usually ask them, when was the first time you can remember experiencing joy? And that has been just a really curious question for me, as people just go back through their lives. I can see them start to remember the time that they experienced joy, so that they can find that first time that they can remember experiencing joy. And that's been a wonderful exercise. Just being with new people, because it just encourages folks to remember those times that they weren't just happy, but they found a well of joy, that they had forgotten about.
So Darryl, I'm curious then, when you have those conversations and you've got an answer to that question, is there a next question, or what does it look like to eventually connect that to faith in God?
Mhm. Yeah. The next question generally branches off of whatever they have responded with, and usually I make it to God pretty early. Folks, because I'll start asking a bunch of questions, they're just like, "Why do you want to know so much about me?" I will usually say, "Well, because I know that God loves you, and I want to find out why." Not saying there's anything against you or anything like that. I just want to find out why, because I feel like I could probably love you too. And that just opens the door to just talking about faith, and their experience with it, or lack thereof.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. So a question I heard recently, I haven't tried it yet, but it's my favorite icebreaker question, new icebreaker question. And it's, what's a food? I have it written down on my desk. I'm going to use it. What's a food you love that most people hate? So anyway, try that one, Darryl, sometime and see. Instead of Disney, try that one and let me know what you get.
I have
well,
a
I mean,
question.
Go ahead, Bridget,
Oh, go ahead.
and then Jonathan, and then we'll open it up.
So sometimes when you're doing things differently from the way church has always been done, and you're out in the community doing the new thing, you can get knocked down from both sides, right? Folks outside the church can knock you down, folks inside the church knock you back. How have y'all overcome when those things happen?
Funny thing is, honestly, curiosity. I early on it was really disappointing. And then I just started to get curious and say, why did you respond that way? Like what's going on there? And usually that gives way to some deeper conversations about people's experiences, so on and so forth. But I found just like being more curious, even in those really hard and thin moments after I get by the like being super ticked off or angry, just trying to get archaeological with it and just saying, okay, what's underneath that question? What's underneath that pushback?
Yeah, and I know y'all know this, but one of my favorite phrases for doing that is tell me more about. So
Yeah.
tell me more about that. Tell me more about, and then just kind of keep pushing it in that way. Jonathan, what were you going to say?
And I'm thinking about a situation in church one time where the staff parish committee was asked if they would accept a woman as their pastor, and the staff parish, one of the members said, "Absolutely not. What's the next question?" And the interim pastor, the district superintendent at the time said, "Okay, next question," and moved on ahead. And the interim pastor interrupted and said, "Whoa, whoa, 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 whoa." And then he looked at the guy that had said that. He said, "Do you even know why you said that?" And which is a much harsher way of asking what you two just said, but it's the same curiosity. I mean, most of that, sometimes people say things they don't even know why they said it. Um, I was at in here in Charlotte. There's a it's kind of a they call themselves a pub and sundries or something. But the uh, oh shoot, I forgot the name of the place, the Rhino Market, and there's one the sister to that over in this one neighborhood, and so I was there. We were doing a thing over there, and ended up in line. It's really hard to figure out how to order a beer. And so I was standing in line with a bunch of food and I saw these three people trying to figure out how to buy beer. And so I said, "Y'all look like you're curious, you don't know how to do it. Let me walk you through how to do this." And so we struck up a conversation as I walked them over to the counter. And they said, "Well, would you like to join our group?" And I said, "Sure, that'd be awesome." And so I went over and joined the group and found myself, and it was weird because one person recognized my voice because that was when I was doing a radio show on the alternative rock station here in Charlotte. And so the guy recognized my voice. Turns out that I was sitting at table with the atheists and agnostics singles group in Charlotte. Um, and and suddenly it became ask the clergy dude a bunch of questions and everything about belief and everything. And and so that was a real useful thing what you guys both just said, saying, I'm just, I'll try to answer it, but do you know why you're asking? What is that question? What's at stake for you in that question? Um, anyway, yeah, so that was just a thing.
So we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to unspotlight each of us so that we can bring the full group into the conversation and see. It doesn't have to be questions, it could be comments or your own experiences. But I wonder if anybody else that's joined us tonight wants to share or ask or participate in the conversation in a particular way. This is your invitation to do that. You can just unmute and speak up.
You may have answered this earlier, but how did you get how did you get the laity to come along with you
Yeah,
in
I
this?
don't think that they answered it directly. So I think that's a great question. Good evening, John.
Good evening.
Who wants to go first?
I'll take a first shot at this, and then Bridget and Darryl can fix whatever I said. Um, I think for me, one of the things is demonstrating. If something can be visible, it really helps. So, like in my current setting, I think the way that the way that that whole conversation changed was they just saw me walking and talking to people who were bringing their dogs to the yard at the church. In other situations, it was people just, seeing me go to the prison, for example, to know that going into prison to do a prison Bible study is okay. I mean, sometimes you just have to demonstrate what it looks like, and you don't even, for me anyway, it's not even the saying, "Hey, you should be like me," as much as it's saying, "Look at what's possible." It other things are there's another story that's possible here, and this is um, that's a little vague, John. I apologize.
Oh, well, thank you. That's good.
Bridget or Darryl?
I would say my current context, it's a lot easier because I'm shaping the whole church around what I'm doing. But in other contexts, it's been come and do it with me. So that kind of that Luke 10 model that I said earlier, I'm not going to go do it by myself. Come and do it with me. And also seeing myself as the chief permission giver in a congregation, so that when laity come and are excited about a project or something, my answer is yes. How can we make that happen? Who's going to do it with you? Rather than, well, no, we don't have the budget and we have to go through this committee. I start with yes, and then let's figure out how we get there.
Thank you.
John Crane is coming on video, so I think he has something to say.
I know. I've been listening, but I was my ears really perked up when I heard my friend John Henry talking about the laity, so as a lay leader, I guess I did want to kind of build on that a little bit, because much of what I think sometimes we hear from churches is the difference between kind of mission outreach versus the opportunity to kind of like bring folks into a sense of, okay, yeah, but how are we going to build membership, right? So, it's that aspect of folks where you're saying we definitely want to be an outreach and do these other kinds of things, and you'll have laity that says yes, and we need more people to help us with that, right? Because I think they come from a good place, but they also recognize we can't be everything to everybody, or not every church can be everything to everybody. And so I wanted to invite you to kind of speak to that balance, that where it's this may be, Bridget, less appropriate in your context with the New Start and trying to build that. But for those of you that are operating more in a traditional church setting, or building towards that, how do you find that balance? Like, how do you work through with your congregation and make decisions as clergy and laity leadership about where you will spend time, energy, and resources across the various programs and outreach opportunities that you see around you?
I try to encourage the communities that I'm a part of to stay hyper focused on our mission and vision, in who we are as a church. We are a people who are called to make disciples. So some of what I've done is to reclaim just who we are as evangelists, and to relocate how we have understood evangelism in the past, which has felt incredibly transactional, to what I believe is a more biblical model for evangelism, which looks a lot like centering relationship above all, and seeing how God can harness those relationships to make disciples, to have those opportunities where you can lead people into relationship with Jesus Christ. And I think that that's really important. That's one of the things that we've lost as a church, especially the United Methodist Church, that we are afraid to claim evangelism now, because You know, evangelism has gotten a bad rap, especially with some of our other evangelistic siblings throughout the years. But realizing that when we are operating well, we are bringing, or not bringing, we are helping people to see that the body of Christ is open to them, that Jesus is right there for them, and providing way for them to access that.
Thank you.
I, I think to kind of build back on what Darryl said, there's the First Timothy passage, I think it's 6:19, that talks about the life that's really living. Um, and so much of that is that, and so much of the way we've kind of made weird things out of evangelism, um, historically, and certainly what's happened to that word. I think we lose sight of that evangelism is an ongoing thing. Like, we're constantly looking for the life that's really living. And so for me, helping folks to understand that this is, and that we're becoming a part of something, and that my role as clergy is only different. And so those resources, sometimes it takes a great leap of faith in a congregation to do a mission project. Like, I mean, quite honestly, my church cannot afford to do the bulb, but we're doing it because our folks recognize how committed we are to that. Because there's a difference between food and real and good food and good for you food, and they feel like there's a witness in that. So because of that, we are. I mean, it's a giant leap of faith that we're going to figure out where the money is going to come from to pay for that. And that's a hard balance when we're worried about institutional survival. I mean, if we just name that as a big elephant in the room, I mean, that's a fear for our denomination. That's a fear in our churches. And sometimes I think that the hardest thing is to do an honest evaluation of where we are. Because, Darryl was talking about mission and vision. This is the mission and vision of the church. And I think sometimes the hardest thing to do is if people can't focus on mission and vision that we've set as a community, that probably means it's time to reassess our mission and vision, and to see, okay, was that really right in the first place? Because that's a much more elemental root question. Um,
Yeah,
Again, I'm speaking in vagaries. Sorry.
that's good, Jonathan. We have time for one more. And Kathy, I saw you came off mute. It looks like you put something in the
Yeah,
chat. Just go ahead and say what you want to say.
I was just going to say, one of you mentioned about your prison ministry, and there's many different things that you do, but I was just relating to that one. As laity, I have found that clergy need to invite us. And I know that lots of times ministers will get up behind the pulpit and mention and do that invitation, but you need to hit that one-to-one invitation sometimes. I think that makes the difference. And if you're working in prison ministry, using myself as an example, if you tell me one of those stories where you have worked with somebody in that prison ministry, you're going to touch my heart, and I'm going to come right alongside you. So, and sometimes it's as simple as that. And I did that this past Sunday, trying to get somebody involved. And after a PPR meeting, I said, "Have you got a minute that you could wait just a minute?" And I invited, and it works. So I give it back. So sometimes it's just a simple one-on-one telling your story and inviting us, and we'll come alongside.
That's a perfect ending, Kathy, because it's not only how you get laity or other people to share in the ministry, but it sounds like it's also the story that Jonathan and Darryl and Bridget have told about how people get to know Christ, and get to be a part of a faith community, is to tell your story and invite them to come alongside with what they're doing. I want, as just a quick promo, because it goes along with what we're talking about. I talked about it at conference. So if you were there, you've already heard about it. But we do have a conference coming up in October called Beyond. And it focuses on evangelism and hospitality or invitation, in a way that we are unapologetic in how we share the good news of Christ to all people, in a more traditional church method, because the gathering is the congregation in St. Louis, and they come and lead it. and their traditional multi-site campus. So anyway, just wanted to put that on your radar. We're hoping it'll fill up, and we really want it to fill up with Western North Carolina folks. You get a discount because there's a code for Western North Carolina to have a $99 registration. And John persevered until he got it to work, and so now we know it works. So we appreciate that. Thank you all for joining us tonight. It has been a great conversation. I have been blessed by it, and I hope you have as well. Especially thanks to Darryl and to Jonathan and Bridget for sharing your stories, giving us insight into your ministries, and engaging with one another and with our group tonight. So we'll have another Equip and Connect webinar coming up in August, and I hope you'll join us then. Good night, friends.